everyone. Welcome to the first Plurilingual Lab speaker series talk this fall. I'm your host, Aisha Barise. I'm a PhD student in Educational Studies and Language Acquisition at McGill. I would like to begin with my sincerest gratitude and appreciation to the Center for Study of Learning and Performance for kindly sponsoring this speaker series, and the Belonging, Identity, Language and Diversity Research Group and McGill's Faculty of Education for the support of this event. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence mark the territory of Turtle Island, also known as Canada, where peoples of the world now gather. It is important to recognize and acknowledge the detrimental effects that settler colonialism has had on Indigenous people to this day, and how we can commit to support the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. I live in Chachage, also known as Montreal. It is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and I acknowledge the Indigenous people of this land, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. I would like to invite you to acknowledge the lands of the Indigenous people where you are today, and if you can do this in the chat, I invite you to do that as well. I would like to invite you to think about our commitment to respect and support and advance the traditions and languages and cultures of the Indigenous people around the world, and the actions that we can take as a part of reconciliation efforts. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker series guest today, Dr. Euline Cutrim-Schmid. Dr. Cutrim-Schmid is a professor of applied linguistics and TEFL and the director of the Institute for Languages and Cultures at the University of Education, Schwäbisch Gmünd in Germany. She's conducted research in areas of computer-assisted language learning, language teacher education, and plurilingual approaches to foreign language teaching and learning. Her work can be found in journals such as Language Learning and Technology, Recall, System Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching, and Applied Linguistics Review. Dr. Cutrim-Schmid's talk today is titled Technologically-Mediated Plurilingual Language Learning, Challenges and Opportunities in Teacher Education. So before we get started, I would like to go over our Zoom etiquette. So please remember to keep your video and sound off during the talk. Reactions are welcome, such as the clapping and thumbs up features. Note that the talk is being recorded and will be available on the Plurilingual Lab YouTube channel. After the talk, we're going to have a 30-minute discussion moderated by my colleague, Li Peng. At this time, you're welcome to post your questions in the chat and to unmute yourself to ask a question, only during this discussion period. And that covers it all. And I now ask you all to turn off your video and sound. Thank you all so much. And without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Cutrim-Schmid.
Sharing my screen. Ok. Bom dia a todos. Já comecei falando português. Eu sou Euline Cutrim-Schmid. Ich bin Professorin für Sprachwissenschaft und Sprachdidaktik an der Pädagogischen Hochschule in Schwäbisch Gmünd, Deutschland. For those who don't understand Portuguese or German, hello everyone. I'm a professor for applied linguistics and TEFL at the University of Education Schwäbisch Gmünd in Germany. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to give this talk today. I'm currently in Montreal, as you can see in the beautiful background. I'm working at McGill University as a visiting professor, and I'm collaborating with Angelica Galanti. So again, the title of my presentation is Technology-Mediated Plurilingual Language Learning, Challenges and Opportunities in Teacher Education. So why so many languages? I think it's always important when you start a presentation that people get to know you and where you're coming from. So I started my academic career at the wonderful city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Then I moved to Lancaster in the UK to pursue my studies at master's and PhD level, where I was surrounded by sheep and fantastic lakes, as you can see here in the pictures, the lakes, Lake District. Then romantic love took me to the beautiful city of Heidelberg, where I worked as an assistant professor, Heidelberg in Germany. And now I have a full professorship at the University of Education Schmid, which is also located at a historical area, very beautiful area, surrounded by nature. And so you can see I've been very lucky in terms of the places where I have lived and worked. And it's a university that specialized in teacher education for all school subjects. Okay, so this is the outline for my presentation today. I will start by contextualizing my research. Then I will provide a brief overview of current research on language teacher education, of course, focusing on the areas of plurilingualism and technology. Then I will present findings of 3 research projects that I'm currently working on. I've chosen these projects because they share important principles about teacher education that I want to emphasize in this talk. It was actually difficult for me to decide which projects am I going to talk about, but I thought these 3 projects, they have some things in common, and I think it would be easier for you to understand the kind of research that I'm doing. Then I will conclude my talk with some suggestions for further research in this area. Okay, so let me tell you briefly something about my research area so that you can better understand where I'm coming from as an academic. So I started my research in the area of computer-assisted language learning, CALL, mainly focusing on the integration of new technologies in the EFL classroom, English as a foreign language classroom. I investigated the use of interactive whiteboards, video conferencing, mobile technology, and so on. And then, due to my position as a teacher educator, I moved into the research on teacher education in computer-assisted language learning. So how teachers can integrate new technologies into their practice. And then about 8 years ago, 2014, I started doing research on plurilingualism and language teacher education. Why did I do that? This was mainly motivated by requests from my student teachers who wanted to learn more about how to teach multilingual or multicultural learners. And so this was really motivated by my own students and what they wanted to learn. And more recently, I've started researching the connection between these 2 topics. So technology and plurilingualism. Makes all sense, right? So I started with CALL, then I moved into plurilingualism, and I'm trying to connect these 2 topics. So technology-mediated plurilingual pedagogies and language teacher education. So this is me, what I have been doing in my career. Okay, so let me tell you something. So just move this a little bit. Yeah. So let me tell you something about my teaching context so that you understand the kind of research that I'm conducting in Germany. And when I say I'm conducting, you should excuse me because I should actually say we are conducting, because all this research is being done in collaboration with other people. So I should always say we. So like other European countries, Germany is becoming increasingly multilingual and multicultural. Due to migration, you probably know the situation in Europe. And this information here that I have for you is from the last census in Baden-Württemberg, which is the state where I live in Germany. And so 34.8% of inhabitants in my state have a migration background. So countries like Turkey, Poland, Italy, Greece, Russia, etc. However, if you consider the school context, we still observe the pervasiveness of practices consistent with monoglossic ideologies. So when you visit schools, at least the schools that I have been working with, but also other schools, because I have seen this in publications as well, you see brightly painted school entranceways welcoming visitors in a range of languages. But those languages, and sometimes even the local dialects, are less evident in the classrooms. And in many schools, learners are not even allowed to use their heritage languages at school, sometimes not even during the break. I've seen situations in which the pupils go to the bathroom to be able to speak their heritage languages. Because in Germany, the focus should be on acquiring the majority language, the school language, German, right? So regarding the EFL curriculum more specifically, the German curriculum documents for English language education clearly emphasize the principle that English should be the consistent language of instruction, so the target language only approach. And since most university instructors, at least in my context, promote adherence to curricular recommendations for target language only approaches, my students frequently demonstrate reluctance when discussing plurilingual education. And they question the idea of opening the EFL classroom, the English as a foreign language classroom, to other languages and cultures. They say, if we can't even use German, why other languages? Right? So it's a little bit contradictory, right? As I mentioned before, I've been doing research on plurilingualism since 2014. And the fact that I work at a university that specializes in teacher education certainly facilitates this process. So in my university, we do work very closely with partner schools, which makes it easier to involve in-service teachers in research. But not only in-service teachers in research, but also our students can get involved in research as well, because they can collaborate with these in-service teachers and develop materials and test them at school, etc. So we have this close collaboration with schools, which is something very positive in my context. And you're going to see, when I start talking about the projects, you will see this in action. Okay, so this is about my teaching context. Okay, so if you think about plurilingualism and language teacher education, what are the challenges, right? Well, we could talk about this all day long, but I have 3 statements here just to get us started into the topic. So the first statement is, current approaches to language teacher education tend to support the development of conceptualizations of languages as compartmentalized units. And this is something that I already referred to when I talked about the German curriculum. So you are a German teacher, you are an English teacher, you are a French teacher, and mostly these teachers don't collaborate with each other. And so they don't know about what the others are doing. And also, the teacher, I'm a teacher of English. I don't care about the other languages the students are bringing into the classroom, because I'm an English teacher. This is my task, is to teach English, for example, in my context, right? And the language education is also working that direction. So there is a need for the design and investigation of new models of language teacher education with a focus on plurilingualism. And the literature also says that collaboration between researchers, pre-service teachers, student teachers, and in-service teachers is key for advancing research in this area. And this is the call that my research wants to address. So I think this collaboration between researchers, pre and in-service teachers is key, right? Of course, the references that I used here, they are only illustrative and not comprehensive, of course, but just to give you some examples. Okay, so we have looked at the different, forgot to move in to show you the slide. Okay, good. So here we can see the challenges, right? Then we have plurilingualism and technology. So what is the challenge, right? So Regarding the relationship between plurilingualism and technology, I want to draw your attention to a phenomenon that has been discussed recently in the CALL literature, in the computer-assisted language learning literature, which is the monolingual bias in CALL. And here I'm going to read a quote from Judith Budinskowski, who has recently defined the monolingual bias as a deficit in considering the full range of pre-existing languages of a learner and of languages used in a specific setting in the design of and the research on computer-assisted language learning. And if we look, okay, of course, Judith Budinskowski is not the only person who has been drawing our attention to this issue, this problem. We have many other researchers. If you think of telecollaboration more specifically, or virtual exchanges more specifically, we have Melo Pfeiffer, who is a researcher who has also published extensively on this topic, that we need to make our virtual exchanges more plurilingual. If we look at the current research on literacy practices, more generally speaking, the research has also shown that learners' everyday technology-mediated plurilingual practices are not usually integrated into the foreign language classrooms. Teachers are mostly not, it seems like teachers are mostly not aware of how their students are using technology outside the classroom and how plurilingual these activities are or can be, right? So I recently read an article by Jérémy Serrault, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and very interesting article I recommend to you. You will be able to see it in the references later on. And he wrote a very interesting article about plurilingualism in digital spaces. And in this article, he urges teachers and researchers to pay more attention to the plurilingual practices that are taking place in digital spaces. For instance, so he mentioned fan subbing activities in social networks and online forums. So what is fan subbing? So it comes from fan and subtitles, fan subbing. So this is the practice of creating and distributing online subtitles in a targeted language, for example, for English or Spanish, by fans of Asian TV and animated series. So very interesting stuff that is going on, right, in the digital space that we are not even aware of. He also mentioned the literacy practices associated with online gaming environments, like these massive multiplayer online role-playing games are also a source of plurilingual practices. I recently conducted an interview with a PhD candidate from Brazil, and she told me that she had learned Turkish and German by playing these online games. And you can imagine how plurilingual these games are, because they are really using this trial and error approach, to learn these languages. And I couldn't test her Turkish, but I could test her German. It is really good. I was really impressed. So it's really amazing what is taking place in these digital spaces and how learners are using the full repertoires, right? Full linguistic repertoires, and we are not even aware of. Another area that he mentioned is the plurilingual writing processes of language learners in digital spaces. What are they doing to write, right? So use of electronic dictionaries, grammar checkers, online forums to ask questions, use of online machine translation tools, for example. So these plurilingual practices are usually not reflected upon in the foreign language classroom. So the teacher is not bringing these practices into the classroom to reflect on them and the added value of these practices and what's happening and what they are doing. So he concludes that the natural tendency of plurilingual learners will be to learn plurilingually. So it should not surprise us that they will apply the same preference to the integration of technologies in their lives, right? So, so my main point here is that we should integrate this technology-mediated plurilingual practices into the classroom. and in teacher education. Okay. So, so what is the current situation of research on teacher education and plurilingualism in Europe? So what is happening in Europe in terms of the research in this area? The research on teacher education and plurilingualism, in my view, is at the moment is flourishing in Europe, right? Of course, we could do much more, but in comparison to some years ago, I think there's a big difference. So, of course, we got and get inspiration from many other contexts. We research that, like, for example, from North America and Africa, that has helped to lay the groundwork for future research, but also current work developed here and in other parts of the world, for example, in Africa or in Brazil or other places. So there is a growing body of empirical research on in-service and pre-service teacher education, focusing on new models for teacher education and also curriculum reform. And the results that have been obtained tend to be very positive. They show that teachers involved in plurilingual teacher professionalization programs tend to hold more positive beliefs, deeper understandings of plurilingualism, and are more likely to use plurilingualism actively in the classroom. And here I have some examples of colleagues that are doing excellent work in this area. But of course, this list is just illustrative. It's not supposed to be comprehensive, of course. These are colleagues that I have collaborated with or I have referenced in my research recently. I know this is just one example of a paper that has been published, for example, recently in good journals, etc. There is much more to it, but I just want to draw your attention to these colleagues and people who are doing excellent work. So, for example, in the Netherlands, Joana Duarte is doing excellent work, and her research team also doing research in collaboration with teachers and researching the impact of teacher education models. So this is really interesting stuff. And then you have in Norway, we have Asta Rokas in her team, also doing excellent work in this area. And then in Spain, we have Melinda Dooley in Barcelona. You also have Cristina Corcol in Barcelona, and people doing very interesting work there, also dealing with technology. And then in Germany, we have University of Frankfurt. We have a very good research team led by Judith Büdikens-Kosten and Daniela Elsner. And they have a very effective group, group that is working really hard on also on this integration of technology and this connection between technology and plurilingualism. So they are doing very good work in this area. And of course, in Austria, you have Eva Vetter, who is doing very good work there. And she recently edited a special issue of an ILA review that is entitled How to Learn to Teach Multilingual Learning. And so we have all these different researchers. Of course, this is not comprehensive, just some examples. We have also the University of Hamburg in Germany is doing excellent work. And so these are just some examples, just for you to have an idea of what's happening in Europe, right? Of course, France, I cannot forget France is also doing excellent work. Okay, so I will move on. Before I present my research projects, I will just very briefly contextualize them by providing a brief overview of the theoretical framework that underlies my research. I couldn't talk about the projects without doing that. I use the term plurilingualism. So I use the term plurilingualism as defined by the Council of Europe, in which plurilingual competence is defined as the ability to use a plural repertoire of linguistic and cultural resources to meet communication needs. So what we want our learners to achieve is to develop this plurilingual competence in whatever context they are. If they're learning English as a foreign language or French as a foreign language, the aim is for them to develop this plurilingual competence. And for the design of the teacher education models, we drew on a social cultural theory to second language teacher education. And here I have the reference to Johnson's work. So if you want to do more, research on the social cultural theory to second language teacher education, she has published many articles on this topic. And she says that according to this theory, teachers learn by being actively engaged in educational practice, forming part of communities of practice, and having opportunities to reflect and theorize based on their own learning, right? There are four important components of the teacher education models that we investigate are reflective, situated practice, right? And collaborative learning. And in our case, especially pre-service, in-service teacher collaboration. We also use a teacher cognition framework in our research, but we don't only focus on what teachers think, know, and believe, and the relationship to what they do, right? But also on their imagined identities and the impact of these identities on their practice and on student learning. And our research is also informed by theories drawn from a critical pedagogy orientation that argue for transformative teaching in multicultural settings for social justice and equity. Okay? And you're going to see these things in action in a minute. And before I move on, I just want to draw your attention to the concept of plurilingual task, because I'm going to be referring to plurilingual tasks a lot when I talk about the projects, so that you understand what I mean when I talk about plurilingual tasks. Because what we have noticed is that in many of the projects, plurilingual projects or implementation of plurilingualism in the classroom, there's a lot of focus on plurilingual exercises. Let's compare languages, let's do this and that. So, and then we really want to focus on tasks, right? So what do we do outside the classroom that is plurilingual? What kinds of plurilingual practices are taking place outside the classroom? And let's bring this plurilingual practice into the classroom, right? So to think about what you can do with language, right? So what is a plurilingual task? I have here a definition. Is a language learning activity that requires or allows the use of multiple languages and diverse cultural knowledge, creates opportunities for learners' use of their plurilingual resources to engage in meaningful and personally relevant communication, and builds on authentic plurilingual practice experienced by learners in their everyday life. So it's basically looking at what is happening outside the classroom that is plurilingual, right? And bringing these practices into the classroom. So that's one of the things that we are really considering in all the teacher education models that we implement. Okay, so now we come to the projects, and that's the juicy part of the presentation. That's what we have been looking forward to. What are we actually doing? Okay, so the first project I want to present is entitled Plurilingual Portraits in Pre-Service Language Teacher Education. This is an ongoing project. So far, we have conducted the pilot study, and I collaborate with Dr. Diane Potts from Lancaster University. She's a senior lecturer at Lancaster University. And we also collaborate with a language teacher at a German high school. And the project aimed to engage students in all three institutions in plurilingual practices. So the master students from Lancaster University, undergraduate students from my university, and grade 6 pupils from the German high school. Okay, so we want to make this connection here. And how did we do that? So these are the different phases of the project. Okay, so in phase 1, 5 German university undergraduate students designed and taught a teaching unit, about 4 lessons, involving the creation of plurilingual portraits to grade 6 high school students. Okay, so about 25 students, pupils, right, in school, 11 to 12-year-olds. So they designed this teaching unit and they taught this teaching unit, and the grade 6 high school students created their plurilingual portraits. So this involved the pre-task, task, and post-task framework, right? And this work was also connected to my teaching, because these 5 German university undergraduate students were taking a course on plurilingualism. So this was part of their learning, right? To go to school, teach, and evaluate something. I usually incorporate this kind of projects in my teaching, because as I said to you, we have this partner schools, and we can do that. In phase 2, the 5 English MA students interviewed the grade 6 high school students about their plurilingual portraits via Skype. So they used English, right, to interact with the grade 6 high school students. And then in phase 3, German and English university students completed coursework which drew on their work in the project. So, so they reflected on what they had done in the project. So the MA students wrote papers, academic papers, and my students did a presentation based on what they had learned during this project, and they reflected on that. So these were our research questions for this pilot study. Okay, so this is an example of a plurilingual portrait from one of our pupils. So first question, how do children whose linguistic repertoires include less privileged languages represent their plurilingualism to others? The other one, how do children's representations of their plurilingualism deepen their theoretical or practical understanding of associated issues for language educators? So we wanted our students also to learn from this work with the plurilingual portraits. Okay. So how did we collect data here? Or so I just have to make this a bit. So we use a qualitative approach to data collection, and we use ethnographic research instruments such as classroom observations and field notes, interviews with the pre-service teachers, recordings of lessons and Skype interviews, student coursework, and also the plurilingual portraits, of course. But so far, we haven't analyzed the plurilingual portraits. We have just published a paper on our pilot study in ILA Review. And in this publication, we analyzed the project experiences and coursework of 2 students, Anastasia and Josh. And these are pseudonyms, of course. And our findings showed that the students' personal histories and experiences with plurilingualism were central to the meaning that they made of the project. This is, of course, not surprising, right? But the question is, to what extent we, as teacher educators, actually create activities that engage student teachers with their plurilingual competence, right? And I'm going to give you one small example here with Anastasia. She was she's a student at my institution, so an undergraduate student. She experienced what we can call a critical incident, right, in her teaching practice, when a child of Sri Lankan heritage did not mention Tamil and Hindi in both her plurilingual portrait and in her Skype interview with the MA students. However, she noticed that the child's heritage languages emerged in a subsequent activity in the post-task phase, when they had to reflect on the project activities. And this episode, or critical incident, as I call it, led Anastasia first to reflect on the status of minority languages in the German high school. We call Gymnasium, the German Gymnasium. And she speculated that the Sri Lankan child was just following what the other children were doing by including only the languages that are somehow part of the school system, like the other foreign languages that they learn, like Spanish or French, and so on, and English, of course. And so she was wondering, why didn't she include her heritage languages in her plurilingual portrait? And she also reflected on her own challenges as a child with a migration background of Greek ancestry, so on the father's side. And she reflected on her struggles to learn the language, the pressure she sometimes felt, and the lack of support. But this whole episode also led her to consider the potential of activities such as the plurilingual portraits to allow the students to engage with their full linguistic and cultural repertoires. Because in this case, even though the heritage languages were not visible in the first phase, they emerged in a subsequent activity. So she thought, this kind of activities can actually allow the students to engage with their full linguistic and cultural repertoires, because they feel like, okay, this is welcomed in this kind of activity. It also depends on the teacher's attitudes as well, right? And she also indexed her future teacher identities as someone welcoming of her students' plurilingual repertoires. And here I can show you a quote. She said, so having this in mind as a future teacher, that some students might have parents who aren't very engaging in their language production. That's interesting to keep in mind in order to create tasks that open it up for them, to motivate them, to say that this has nothing to do with your parents at home or your peers. If you have a language that you are able to learn, just use the chance. So, this episode, which was something very, you could consider something small, right? But for her, since it touched her emotionally, right? This made her reflect a lot on the potential of plurilingual portraits, the use of plurilingual portraits in the foreign language classroom. And so we have published on this pilot project, as I already mentioned. So here I have the reference. ILA review, it's just been published, and you can see more, more to it. So you can read more about it and also about the other case study. So this is an open access article. And one of the conclusions we had is that the engagement with teachers' inner lives, their personal histories, and belief systems may impact the extent to which plurilingual activities act as catalysts for shifts in their language ideologies, right? So this connection between what you think about language, what you have experienced with your languages, right? This connection to this and the things that you're going to learn as a teacher, right? The new concepts that you're going to learn as a teacher. So this connection between everyday concepts from your experience and the scientific concepts that you acquire when you start becoming a teacher, when you study at university. So we would really see this very strongly in this project. Okay, so this was the plurilingual project, and we are continuing the project. This was a pilot study. We are going to continue as a design-based project later on. Okay, and then we move on to the template project, which is a European project. And here I'm collaborating with many researchers from around Europe. So a template project is a European project. So let me just check how much time I have. Okay, I'm fine. Okay. So the template project is a European project funded by the Erasmus Plus Key Action 2 program. So basically it means forming strategic partnerships with different universities. And it's coordinated by Dr. Elisa Corino from the University of Turin, with other 4 partners from Germany, other 4 partners from Europe. And so Germany, Belgium, Lithuania, and Spain. And template stands for Technology-Mediated Plurilingual Activities in Language Teacher Education. And here we have plurilingual activities, but actually I would prefer plurilingual tasks, because our project placed a lot of emphasis on the idea of the use of plurilingual tasks. And so what is the main goal of this project, the template project? The main goal of the project is the design, implementation, and evaluation of a set of professional development modules that can help teachers to integrate new technologies effectively into their practice and embrace students' plurilingual repertoires as valuable linguistic and cultural resources for language learning. So it's integrating new technologies, but at the same time embracing students' plurilingual repertoires, right? So the modules, they focus on various contexts in which plurilingual language education can be implemented. For example, the CLIL context, content and language integrated learning. We have the Spanish team that is doing a lot of work on that. I don't know if you know, but Spain is very well known for implementing CLIL a lot in the primary and secondary classrooms. And so they are responsible for this module, the CLIL module. And we have a module for the Modern Foreign Language Classroom, MFL classroom. And here we have the Belgian team that is leading the work on that. And we have other ones, but one of them is telecollaboration, so virtual exchanges. And this one is actually coordinated by Germany. And so we are responsible for this specific module. And today, I will talk about data collected in the implementation of this module, the telecollaboration module. I won't talk about all the other modules, so there is much more to it, but you can go to the website. And the implementation of this module, so basically we design the module, we implement the module, and we evaluate the module in cooperation with the teachers, right? So to what extent the teachers think that it's a good module for teacher education. And we also get feedback from the pupils if the teachers do some kind of implementation in school. So we really want to investigate, to analyze these modules in cooperation with the teachers, the participant teachers in the project, right? So this is the idea of the template project, right? And for the telecollaboration module, so we designed some activities, we designed some, materials for theoretical input, and we also thought about the activities that we're going to implement with the teachers, of course, and then we implemented them and then we analyzed the results. And the implementation of this module followed a situated practice approach. What is this? It's an approach in which in-service teachers, in this case, the in-service teachers, learn how to set up plurilingual virtual exchanges for their learners by taking part in a telecollaboration project themselves. Okay, so they take part in a telecollaboration project, and in this process, they also learn how to set up plurilingual virtual exchanges for their learners in collaboration with other teachers. And in this project, I collaborated with Anita Svetkovic-Kinley and Hilal Shahin, who are PhD students working in the project. Good. So what did we do in this specific module, right? So this is just to give you an example of what we do in the template project. So we worked with 18 teachers. Right, so this is a little bit bigger than the previous one, right? The previous project was a very small scale project. And now it is becoming a little bit bigger, right? Because we have different countries involved, but also we work with more teachers. And as I said, here we are focusing on the in-service teachers. We worked with 18 teachers from 5 different European countries, teaching various foreign languages like English, French, Spanish. The idea is that these teachers would become multipliers in their own contexts. So that they would, for example, provide training to other teachers in their own context, in their own schools, right? And the main elements of the training were, first of all, 4 online Zoom workshops, asynchronous activities on Moodle, and it also involved some school-based telecollaboration projects, right? So basically, the teachers came to the sessions, to the workshops, which was a virtual exchange. I'm going to explain more what we did. And then they got to know each other, and then they found partners in order to be able to set up telecollaboration projects for their learners. And they implemented this, and this was part of their training. So it was a whole academic year training, if we could see it like this. So in our case, in Germany, we followed 3 teachers. So came to the workshops, they did the activities on Moodle, they paired up with Italian teachers. In our case, we had German, Italian. And then we followed 3 teachers. So we provided on pedagogical support, technical support, and we collected data from these 3 teachers, right? 6 teachers, but the German teachers were only 3. So 2 primary and 1 secondary. So we follow these teachers, and then after they finished their projects, the school-based projects, they presented their results to the other members of the group, right? To tell them what we have done, what we have learned from our experiences with telecollaboration. And the technologies to be used were Zoom, of course, I already said, and Padlet, Kahoot, Flipgrid, Google Forms, Google Docs, of course, Moodle for the synchronous part. And they had to do activities, discussion, take part in discussion forums and things like that. Good. So some sample activities. Here we have an example of a Padlet. I think Padlet is becoming very well known. I think everybody's using Padlet nowadays. So we use Padlet a lot in this project. So here are some examples of activities that we carried out. So we wanted to show to the teachers that when they do telecollaboration and they create tasks, they don't have to change everything in order to make it plurilingual. Sometimes it's a small thing that you add to the activity that makes it plurilingual, right? And so, for example, the activity getting to know each other, right? They had to add 3 adjectives that describe them in a language of their choice. So this made it more plurilingual, right? And then when they got together in small groups to talk to each other in the breakout sessions, for example, and talking about the Padlet and their descriptions that they had provided. They then had to guess what the words meant, and then in this way they could use their knowledge of other languages to make sense of these new words, and they could compare languages. And so this took place in the breakout sessions, for example, right? So something very small. Or, for example, the comparison and analysis task. One example was the linguistic landscapes, which is also an activity that is becoming very common also, in which learners take pictures of signs in their communities, linguistic landscapes and bring these pictures to the classroom to see how languages are represented in their contexts. And normally you're teaching English, so many teachers ask the students to look at how English is represented in their context, and they bring signs and reflect on why English is being used in this context or that context. And in this case, when they use all the different languages present in their communities, and thinking about the status of these different languages and why these languages are used. So you are kind of going beyond the target language only approach, right? Because then they start thinking about all languages, and it's something very small. It's a small change, right? But it can make a big difference. So the linguistic landscape. And for the collaborative task, for example, one example was to change a regular language learning task into a plurilingual task, right? So we gave them examples of language learning tasks actually from another European project, and they had to analyze the task to discuss if they like the task or not, and then also add plurilingual elements to the task. And this was very interesting because these teachers, they were not teaching only English as a foreign language. These were teachers from different languages, right? As I said before, and so there was a lot of translanguaging in the breakout sessions. Especially, we used English as lingua franca for the workshops, but the teachers were doing a lot of translanguaging because they were not trained to be English teachers, and so this made it even more interesting, I think, for everybody. And so they thought about how to change tasks and how you can do that. So this was one of the things we did in the workshop. But the main idea was for them to experience what does it look like. What does a virtual exchange look like? What do we have to do? How do we get together? How do we collaborate? And so it was very interesting how they transferred all of these experiences into their teaching later on. And we are looking at that in the data when we are looking at what they did in the classrooms when they implemented the telecollaboration projects to their own learners, right? And so it was very interesting, the references that they made. Okay, and of course, we wanted to look at the impact of this professional development initiative on teachers' competence development, and that's why we wanted to follow them in these case studies. Okay, so here, these are the research instruments that we used to collect data. We used in-depth individual interviews, focus group interviews, classroom observations, field notes, pupil questionnaires, video recording of teachers' online presentations. So we use an ethnographic approach of using ethnographic research instruments, and we use thematic analysis to analyze the data according to Brown and Clark. So this is something I haven't mentioned yet, but we use thematic analysis. So in terms of technology use, the teachers did use the tools that we suggested, Moodle, Padlet, Flipgrid. They really managed to integrate all these technologies into their projects. And they faced technical challenges, of course. But they did their best to integrate the technologies in the way that we had also done in the workshops. But our findings have shown that adding a plurilingual dimension was a challenging aspect for the implementation of telecollaboration. Since these were, so our three teachers, they were English as a foreign language teachers, okay? So since they were English as a foreign language teachers, they focus on providing their learners with opportunities to use a target language in an authentic context. And they were also influenced by school policies of English-only immersion. So their main idea was, okay, I want to make sure my pupils have enough, opportunities to use English in an authentic way. However, our data have shown that the plurilingual practices emerged naturally in the student interactions. And this is a very interesting thing. As they use English as lingua franca and try to negotiate meaning with each other, so the plurilingual practice just emerged. So for instance, so when they use words that cannot be translated to English, like for example, in German, we have the ganz Tag Raum, Ganztagraum is a room that you can use when the class is finished and you want to do your homework or other activities in the afternoon. In Germany, you have this room that's called the Ganztagraum. Ganz is whole, Tag is day, and Raum is room, so Ganztagraum. And they found it difficult to explain this, so there was no translation. They asked the teacher, no, there is no translation, so they had to paraphrase and explain it, and to also reflect that there are some words that cannot be translated to English or to other languages, right? And they had to use the German word and explain it. Yeah? And also in the secondary level, when the teacher wanted to control the interactions by asking the students to use email, and the students just started using other tools like Instagram or WhatsApp, and so we noticed that when they used these other tools, that they were kind of translanguaging, using at least Italian and German was present, and even other languages, because they felt more relaxed, right? Because now the teacher is not looking at it. And so when the teacher started observing these things, these observations sometimes acted as catalysts for shifts in their language ideologies as well. So, for instance, I want to give an example from one of the teachers. One of the German teachers was very strict with the English-only approach, right? But she found the idea of using English as lingua franca quite liberating. And so she asked, she wrote in her reflection, so she didn't have to contact someone in the UK. So she always thought for telecollaboration, she would need to contact someone, for example, in the UK or in the US, etc., right? And she also said that the pupils felt the same, and they could take better ownership of the target language. So here I have a quote from this teacher, which I found very interesting. The teacher said, "And English was perfect because I noticed that it is ideal to use English as a lingua franca to lower inhibitions. The pupils told me, I'm okay with speaking English now. It doesn't matter if I make a mistake. Maybe the other person won't even notice." So this idea that the pupils could take better ownership of the target language. It's also my language, and I can make mistakes, and it's okay. I won't feel like a failure, right? So I think for this teacher, it was very, very special to see how the pupils themselves felt more relaxed and less anxious, right, to use the target language because they were using English as lingua franca. So from this project, and also here I have another example from an Italian teacher. So in this project, it was primary school level, and the pupils, when they started the project, when they had to introduce themselves, they could use any language they wanted. So the pupils use either the school language or the heritage languages, and so they had to say, "Oi, eu sou Euline Cutrim Schmid." Hello, I'm Euline Cutrim Schmid, right? So they could use their heritage language. And this was something very small. Most of their interaction was English as lingua franca, but just the fact that they could use their languages to get started, right, to introduce themselves, this created some difference for them. So the teacher said they were proud to speak the language of their family. And I think it's important. And now we have a class where every now and then we use Portuguese, Arabic, and the children ask, how do you say this word in Arabic? How do you say this word in Portuguese? So they asking each other, because now they know this child speaks Arabic and this child speaks Portuguese, so they start asking each other questions, right? And so you see how this telecollaboration, even though the teachers were still struggling, with the idea of including other languages, but then the pupils themselves start, bringing these aspects into the classroom. So you just get started, and then the pupils themselves will do it for you. So from this project, I want to emphasize the importance of situated practice for teacher learning. In this case, teachers have taken part in workshops, right? We saw them I explained what they did in the workshops, and it was we had like a 2-month period of workshops and presentations and all of that. And they even took part in a telecollaboration project themselves. But it was mainly after they could put their knowledge into practice and could actually see how their learners reacted that they started to open up to a more holistic understanding of language and language use, right? So here you see this aspect. So we have presented on this project at the Eurocall conference, and you can get more about it in our presentation. It's on YouTube, so you just have to Google and you can find it. Okay, good. So let me check my time. Oh, I only have 3 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay, good. So I only have 3 minutes for the Valiant project. I'm really sorry, but I will do my best. So the Valiant project is another European project. It's actually a bigger project. It stands for Virtual Innovation and Support Networks for Teachers. It's a European project funded under the Erasmus Plus Key Action 3 program. And it's coordinated by Dr. Robert O'Dowd from the University of León in Spain. So the project investigates the impact of virtual exchange programs on teacher professional development in different areas, such as intercultural collaboration, motivation, self-efficacy, etc., etc. So what is the aim of the project? Basically, the project aims at bringing together teachers, student teachers, and experts in facilitated online collaboration, right? So we are investigating 8 virtual exchange modules in 3 rounds. So 3 consecutive semesters. So we have formats for teacher education via virtual exchange, right? And then we want to investigate these formats, these different formats. And the topics are very diverse, like inclusion, telecollaboration itself, or gamification in foreign language education, classroom technologies, etc. Okay, and these modules are different formats of virtual exchange. And I'm going to show you one example, which is the one we implemented at our university. Okay, so in terms of the whole project, we want to reach at least 300 in-service teachers and 600 student teachers across 7 partner countries from Spain, Portugal, Germany, Sweden, Cyprus, Slovenia, and Norway. And the interesting thing here is that the ministries of education are also involved to make sure that there is some kind of sustainability when we find the, when we get the results, that this can be integrated into the curriculum. So we have researchers and the ministries as well working together, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this specific project that we developed at our university. We had, so the virtual exchange was called Using New Technologies in the EFL Classroom. So we had 25 pre-service teachers at a German university, our university, doing a course on computer-assisted language learning, and 15 in-service teachers from around Europe who were the mentors, right? So very interesting project. So getting these 2 groups together. The main activity was the design, implementation, and evaluation of a technology-enhanced language lesson, right? So we formed 8 groups composed of 3 pre-service teachers, right, and 2 in-service teachers. Oh, I don't have that. Okay, but I have to. Okay, so and 3 in-service teachers, and 2 in-service teachers. Sorry, and so we had groups of 5, and they worked together in the design, implementation, and evaluation of a lesson, right? So we used data from pre and post test. So these were online surveys. So a pre-survey, a mid-survey, and a post-survey to check the impact of the virtual exchange on their development in different areas, as I already mentioned, right? But we also collected qualitative data, like reflective diaries, interviews, student portfolios, their presentations, etc., etc. Okay, So I'm still in the process of analyzing the data, and so far I have focused only on the pre-service teachers and the perceived impact of their learning and professional development. Some of the themes that have been derived from our data so far are, for example, more confidence in interacting with other cultures, learning about different teaching cultures, enhanced interest in teaching in other countries, increased motivation to participate in international teacher networks. Here I have some quotes. Teacher said, pre-service teacher said, it made it even more interesting to see how teachers from all around the globe are doing their job. It was interesting to plan a lesson for a class in a different country and see it work quite well. So they designed the lesson together with the teacher implemented and gave feedback on the implementation. And as a student teacher considering to go teach abroad after my studies, the exchange has encouraged me to do so. I think at the end, it can help my joining a network of teachers around Europe and be open to talk to them. So from this project, so these kinds of attitudes, if you think about this result here and the curiosity for what goes on beyond their realities is a very important aspect of teacher development, especially for these students who are going to work in increasing multilingual and multicultural contexts, right? So from this project, I want to emphasize again the added value of pre-service, in-service collaboration. Lately, my colleagues have mentioned the fact that students are less interactive in their class after the pandemic. By looking at the students' presentations for this project, and which took place online, I could see it, and their reflections, you can really see a great difference in engagement and motivation in comparison to other university courses. You can imagine why, right? So they were really getting to know these teachers and collaborating with them. So I want to provide some recommendations, but I think I already talked about all of them individually when I talked about the individual projects, so I'm not going to go through that again. And for further research, I want to call for the integration of students. I want to call for increased focus on research on the development of language teacher professional identity, right? To look at this development, because scholars call for the integration of students' linguistic and cultural resources into language teaching, and teachers are expected to reflect on their professional identities, moving away from viewing themselves as teachers of one specific language only and considering themselves as plurilingual educators. And for future teachers, they imagine professional identity, meaning their imagination of who they want to become, is of particular relevance as it shapes their learning during teacher education. So I want to draw your attention here to PhD project. Hilal Shahin, my PhD student, is doing a qualitative study focusing on pre-service English teachers' imagined professional identity construction in a course on plurilingualism. It will be published in 2023. So just to make you curious. And I just want to conclude on the importance of international collaborative work. It is key for the advancement of research in this area, right? And so I want to thank you very much for your attention. And I want to, muito obrigada, vielen Dank, thank you very much, merci beaucoup. These are my special thanks to my colleagues, and these are my presentation. My references for this presentation. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went a little bit beyond the time, but yeah, I got carried away. Thank you for your attention. Yes, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cutrim Schmid. I thank you in my heritage language, Somali, an East African language, an East African Cushitic language. I now invite my colleague Li Peng to moderate the discussion session.
Thank you, Aisha.